So, you like games? Let's play a game of death.
There's a lot of games on the Switch, and there's no way we could test them all, but I thought it would be fun to expand upon our typical approach and check out more games in one video. So for this video, we're taking a bite-sized look at several different games, starting with Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes, a strange new Unreal-powered Suda51 title. Octahedron, a brilliant platform game which finally makes an appearance on Switch. Battle Princess Madelyn, a beautiful homage to the Ghouls and Ghosts series. And Firewatch. As a game which launched in a troubled state on more powerful consoles, I had to know, how does it look and run on Switch? Ready? Let's give it a shot. Travis Strikes Again is a rather strange little game, but worth discussing, both from a design and technical standpoint. This adventure basically sees Travis working his way through a series of cancelled games for the Death Drive Mark II, an unreleased console which kills people using DAT tapes, a pair of mice, and other interesting accessories. You can learn more about the console from the in-game magazine articles covering it prior to cancellation. The core game then focuses on hack and slash action, but each of the games for the Death Drive Mark II feature their own unique hooks. It's not exactly a No More Heroes sequel, but it's still a fun little action game. There's a lot of pseudo weirdness throughout, of course, and it might just be one of the most polished titles Grasshopper has ever released. For starters, it's powered by Unreal Engine 4, and, well, the game makes this very clear with Unreal-themed t-shirts and other random shoutouts.
About the most badass assassin in video games.
The game features a boatload of references to other indie games too, mostly in t-shirt form, but titles like Hotline Miami have a clear influence on elements of the game. From its appearance during the introduction,
take one more step, and you're dead,
to one of the Death Drive games. After solving a light puzzle, you enter a target house and wipe everyone out, Hotline Miami style. In this case though, the choice of engine really is an interesting point of discussion, as Grasshopper Manufacture has been using Unreal for quite some time, just not always that well. You see, with many of their older games running Unreal Engine 3, such as Killer is Dead, the performance is a real issue, with low frame rates and loads of screen tearing. Let It Die was a huge improvement, but that was running on the PS4. This is a Switch game we're talking about. And yeah, Unreal Engine 4 has great Switch support, but most games using the engine run at 30 frames per second, so I certainly didn't expect Grasshopper to deliver a 60 FPS Unreal powered game on Nintendo's portable console. But that's exactly what we get. I must admit, I was genuinely surprised with these results. When I first saw Travis Strikes Again, it was an early build at a trade show, running at roughly 45 frames per second or so, I'd say. In the back of my mind, I didn't really expect the final game to make such leaps and bounds, at least based on previous Unreal-powered Grasshopper games, but, well, here we are. The game does deliver a rock-solid 60 frames per second most of the time, and feels great to play as a result. The camera is mostly a fixed perspective above Travis, but it does move around more dynamically at points. In some ways, I'm almost reminded of games like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance in terms of fluidity and perspective, but obviously this is its own unique game. That's not to say it's 100% perfect, mind you, as I did run across a number of different areas where the frame rate dipped a touch when the action heated up. I also noticed some rather annoying skips and hitches that would pop up in very select areas, like this forest section from the third game on the Death Drive. You'll almost certainly notice this when it happens. But thankfully, these moments are surprisingly rare. It really is very stable overall, which is quite an achievement, especially for a smaller team like this. Of course, much of this headroom is likely achieved by restraint in terms of visual design. It's fair to say that this is a fairly Spartan looking game, but it does work well enough and there's plenty of variety between the different game worlds. There's something to be said for restraint enabling smooth performance. The camera, though, is usually zoomed pretty far out, giving you a better view of the world around you. These environments range from the very plain to the sometimes rather striking. The lower budget routes are certainly evident here, with each stage lasting just a bit too long for its own good, but honestly, it gets the job done. It's no more repetitive than the original No More Heroes, really, and it looks pretty nice most of the time. Beyond the visual design, the lower resolutions used by the game also likely help boost performance. You see, in docked mode, Travis Strikes Again appears to deliver a 720p image with decent anti-aliasing courtesy of Unreal Engine 4. It's a tad blurry on a large display, but I suppose this was necessary to hit the target frame rate. In portable mode then, resolution is dropped to 480p, which really doesn't look bad at all on the Switch's built-in display. And thankfully, performance is also excellent in portable mode. The frame rate is very similar to what we get in docked mode, targeting the same 60 frames per second and hitting it most of the time, so that's not something you need to worry about. Honestly, lower resolutions have kind of become the norm on Switch for games targeting these higher frame rates while using 3D graphics, so honestly, it's not that surprising. Now these days, there's always a slim chance of dynamic resolution, but honestly, based on our pixel counts, it really does not seem to change at all. It appears to be fixed at 480p and 720p. So it's an interesting specimen then. It's not a stunning game by any means, and the resolution is a tad low, but the performance is surprisingly great, and it has a lot of fun design ideas. From a segment featuring full motion video, to these graphic novel sequences used to push the plot forward, to the PlayStation 1-esque CGI introduction of the third game. There's a lot of creativity on display here. It's a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, and thanks to the smooth frame rate, it also plays rather nicely. So yeah, I like this one. It's a slick little action game with that typical Suda craziness, just without all the jank. The development team has done a great job here, and the game is definitely worth checking out if you're interested in something a little different. You may not be familiar with Octahedron, but let me tell you, this is one of the best platforming games of the last few years. That's no exaggeration. Developer Demimonde has crafted a true love letter to games like Mega Man and Bionic Commando while delivering a stunning presentation and soundtrack. The game features a lot of cool visual effects in the background to deliver an LED visualizer-like experience with some subtle use of things like scan lines along the way. It looks great, and naturally, a game like this demands a smooth 60 frames per second frame rate with responsive controls. Being 2D, it's also something you would expect, but achieving it is not so simple. Octahedron was developed by just one person, and I had an opportunity to discuss some of the challenges with them, which just happens to give us some insight into what it takes to optimize a game like this for the Switch. First and foremost, the original version released last year was created using Game Maker Studio 1.4, which doesn't really support Nintendo Switch, so the project needed to be converted to Game Maker Studio 2.0. A lot of changes were required, but the result is a more optimized game. Working with the Switch also proved rather pleasant, with clear guidelines and excellent development tools that were all relatively simple to use. Compared to the other platforms, Marco, the game's developer, reckons Switch was the easiest. That certainly helps partially explain its popularity in the indie scene, I suppose, and represents a major shift from the rather unfriendly Wii U. When development first kicked off then, the game was barely 30 frames per second. Overcoming this issue required a lot of optimizations, such as dynamically enabling less costly visual effects when the risk of running over budget on frame time occurs. Another optimization trick involves the collectible tetrahedrons. In the original game, these were pseudo 3D objects calculated and rendered with basic 2D primitives. Marco found that for some reason these objects took a huge bite out of the frame time budget when they were on screen. The solution? Losslessly capture the objects and turn them into a sprite. Due to the huge number of frames used then, it's basically indistinguishable from the original. Mirroring, variable animation speed, and rotation are all tricks used to further randomize the appearance. He even made some behind-the-scene changes to certain algorithms to reduce the frequency at which they are calculated. Some visual effects, such as the LED background, don't really need to be calculated at full frame rate since so little changes from frame to frame. Thus, by reducing certain things to update at 20 or 30 frames per second instead, you save on frame time. This is just scratching the surface, but it gives you some idea of the challenges faced in bringing a game like this to the Switch. But I feel the result is a huge success. Octahedron is remarkably fluid with virtually no loading times, a perfect frame rate, and remarkably responsive controls. It just looks and feels amazing to play. Marco even put a lot of extra work into ensuring the audio mix was of the highest quality. The dynamic range is really impressive here, while bass is super smooth. It just sounds wonderful, and it's a game you're going to want to crank up. It's easy for a game like this to be lost in a sea of platform games on the Switch, but honestly, this one is worth a look. It's clear that it was developed with a full understanding of what makes classic 8 and 16-bit Japanese platform games shine. The level design, controls, and mechanics are all brilliant here, and the Switch port is equally well done. Be sure to check it out. And here's another platform game. This one released a month or so ago for Switch after being kickstarted a couple years back, and the results are extremely appealing to my retro sensibilities. This is, in effect, a game heavily inspired by Capcom's Ghouls and Ghosts series, with gorgeous new pixel art and a brilliant soundtrack. It may also surprise you to learn that this game was built using Unity. Games built in Unity have a good track record on the Switch, mind you, but targeting and hitting 60 frames per second is no easy task. To begin with, I want to highlight the visuals here. The developers have managed to achieve the pixel-perfect look necessary to pull off classic sprite-based action. Everything is scaled and displayed using Nearest Neighbor to avoid linear filtering, and it's all properly snapped to a virtual grid of sorts, which ensures that elements only move in single full-pixel chunks defined by the artwork. No half-pixel steps here, which would kind of shatter the illusion. I think it's important to highlight that the basics are done so well though, because there have been a lot of other Unity-made platforms that just don't feel authentic. This does, and the first impressions are remarkably positive. The color palette, sprite complexity, and background detail all exceed what was possible during the early 90s, but it feels like an authentic evolution. I especially love things like the water reflections used at various points throughout the game. Just look at this. That said, while everything looks great to begin with, I did notice a couple minor problems during gameplay. While performance is mostly steady, there are several sections where the frame rate starts to buckle. It's clear that the poor Switch just can't quite cope with the number of on-screen objects. I suppose though, if we're fair here, the frame rate is still smoother than Capcom's own Super Ghouls and Ghosts on the Super NES, but still, it's a tad disappointing. Fortunately, the game's developer has suggested that Switch performance will be improved in an upcoming patch, so there is some hope. As for the game itself, well, there's a story mode and an arcade mode. The story mode is set to receive some major changes in a patch as well, and for good reason. It's a bit tedious in its current state. But that's okay, because the main draw here is the arcade mode. This is where it wears its Capcom inspirations on its sleeve, and where the game plays best. The arcade mode is a great challenge, though not necessarily as brutal as Capcom's originals. The level design is excellent and it feels amazing to play. This is where I've put most of my time, and I absolutely love it. So it's an interesting project then. The small development team did a wonderful job with the level design, presentation, and controls. It's just not yet perfect on the Switch. Even still, it's a game I would recommend checking out for sure. It's that time again, I guess. Yep, it's Firewatch. First released years ago on PlayStation 4 and PC and eventually Xbox One, it was kind of a mess at launch with severe technical issues and performance problems. It was patched and improved over time, of course, but it got off to a rough start. Which is why I was so curious about this Switch version. This narrative-driven experience was remarkable for its atmosphere and storytelling, but those original technical problems really detracted from the experience. So what's up with the game on Switch? Well, firstly, this is another Unity title, and first impressions aren't too bad. In fact, between this and Travis Strikes Again, the initial tests made me think that we were looking at something of a redemption arc. Unfortunately, that doesn't last. So I guess the first thing to know here is Firewatch seems to run at 720p on Switch when docked, and this includes the HUD and text elements. Combined with the anti-aliasing method in use then, it's a rather blurry game on a large television. When in portable mode, we had some trouble discerning exactly what's going on, with counts of both 600p and 640p with 960 pixels in the horizontal. So that suggests that perhaps we're looking at some sort of dynamic resolution. Either way, it seems to fall below 720p while never really dropping to anything insane, so it's not too bad. Textures though appear rather blurry, and the artwork in general lacks the clarity of the original version. Beyond that, shadow map drawing is extremely evident in many scenes throughout the game, with shadows sort of drawing in right in front of the camera at various points during exploration. At the same time, foliage, such as grass, often pops in right in front of the player, which is also distracting at times. But really, it looks good enough and retains the atmosphere of the original game. The full story's here, all the dialogue, all the music, everything's here. That's not a problem. No, the real problem is, disappointingly, the performance. Firewatch is still kind of a mess in this regard. Let me explain. Firstly, unlike the launch PS4 version, the 30 FPS cap is enforced here right from launch, which is important as that prevents wild fluctuations in frame rate. This helped a lot on PlayStation 4, and it certainly helps here. The spikes aren't that severe. During normal exploration then, honestly, the results aren't half bad, and the game manages to hold relatively closely to its 30 FPS target. So I was thinking we were in for a good time here then, but things start to change as you progress through the game. In fact, once you get the call to go down to the lake and check on those girls, well, things start to struggle. Scenes like this exhibit noticeable dips which really kill the sense of fluidity. It happens again and again throughout, in fact, and that's really the problem. When moving between areas, the performance just seems to drop like a stone. Perhaps it's related to streaming assets and loading data into memory? Either way, it's highly distracting and it pops up again and again. There are also areas which just seem to struggle in general with poor average performance. This is not an action game, so it's not like it's difficult to play, but the lack of fluidity does hurt the narrative experience. And it's a lot worse in portable mode too. The dips occur far more often and are sustained for a longer period of time. Honestly, while the docked mode is quite playable, the portable mode feels just awful, and that should have been a great way to experience Firewatch. I was hoping for a positive story here with this port, but unfortunately it just isn't where it needs to be. So yeah, Firewatch on Switch is, in my estimation, the least performant version of a game that already has performance issues elsewhere. Of the 4 games we've examined today, this is the only one that really disappoints from that perspective, which is a shame as it's a great little piece of storytelling. I really did enjoy the game originally when I first played it through on PC. Which is why I'm also still very interested in seeing where the team goes from here. In the Valley of Gods is their next game, and based on the initial trailer, the leap in visual quality is beyond significant. It's a seriously stunning looking game and is also being created with Unity Engine once again, though presumably a more recent capable version. We'll certainly keep an eye on that one. But that's pretty much it. 4 games, 1 video. What did you think? The idea was to cover slightly smaller games that maybe couldn't support a full video while still giving each of them a fair shake. So the final takeaway then is this. Travis Strikes Again is a fun little action game from Suda51 and team that I did enjoy quite a bit. It's a tad repetitive and its lower budget is certainly evident, yet it runs quite well and is often a lot of fun. It's a cool, quirky little game. Octahedron then is my favorite of the bunch by far. Just a gorgeous, super optimized game with great controls, level design, and music made by one person. Just a tremendous game with an amazing Switch conversion. Battle Princess Madelyn then is also quite good, but its story mode is a little rough and performance on Switch isn't quite where I'd like. If the developers can indeed solve these issues though, it'll be a must-own for retro platforming fans. Lastly, there's Firewatch. It's an experience I've enjoyed in the past, but the Switch version just isn't good enough. The frame rate is lousy and image quality takes a hit. It's still playable, but the other versions are better. But that's it for the moment. Let me know if you want another video like this in the future, and if you did enjoy it, be sure to let us know by liking, subscribing, ringing the notification bell, and following us on Twitter. And until next time.
Why do you live? The hours of famine. They're after Satan. Why aren't you dead?